Welcome to the new sound of online radio. Welcome to the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network. 'Cause you make me feel like I've been locked out of heaven. A mix of today's hits and hard-to-find favorites, combined with the most entertaining and intriguing talk anywhere. This is your sound. This is the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network at UBNradio.com.
Welcome to Richard Listens on Sports. I'm the host, Peter Sobey, alongside the doctor who's in the house, Richard Olberger. Dr. Richard Olberger, the big smile on his face with our new theme music. It's always exciting.
It's the music and it's your purple hat.
Yes. My purple hat. And you might think that it's in honor of Prince and Purple Rain, which I love Prince and I love that movie, but it's not.
It's another famous P.
Yeah, it's in honor of our guest today. And people can't quite see your hat yet, but it's also an homage to our guest today. I'm sure you've seen lots of our promos and stuff like that, and we will get to him in just a few minutes, but it's very exciting to have him back on the show. And this is our first show of 2018. So that's exciting in and of itself. I can't believe it's 2018. It felt like just a few years ago was Y2K. You know, we were all freaking out about computers changing over to the new century. And here we are almost 20 years into the new century. Crazy.
That happened so quick.
So happy New Year, Dr. Richard.
Thank you.
Since the audience has last seen us, there's been holidays, New Year's, and I celebrated a birthday, the big 50. Can you believe it? 50 years old? What? Come on.
Happy 50th.
And can you hold up the very nice gift you gave me as a Chicago native and Bears fan?
Just couldn't think of a better gift than your favorite football team
There you go.
that you can represent.
And ironically, I've got Bears jerseys and hats, but no Bears T-shirts, so it's perfect.
Well,
Except, like I said, I got the T-shirt that says Bears 46, Patriots 10 from Super Bowl 20. But that was like...
got to hang on to those glory days.
That was from, my high school days. It was like a medium, so I still have it, but it doesn't fit anymore. So thank you, Dr. Richard,
yes,
for that
we
fine
hope your birthday
gift.
was meaningful. And
It was very special. It was a really special, a very special day. So thank you, yes. So it's New Year.
happy 2018. Glad to be here. It's an exciting day today to have a return guest to come back and share his conquests in the world. And we are here to share your journey and how you continue to transform through your work. So we're excited to have Mr. Paul Shirley back in studio.
Yes.
The break was, I'm glad Caitlin's with us today to share some wellness tips.
Yes, we had Caitlin live in studio for a couple shows, the last two.
And people are going to be in an uproar that she's not with us in person, but she's still live via Zoom.
Yes.
People will be disappointed to know that I did lose in my fantasy football final.
By like 6 points or something?
Yes. So, these are lessons in
GD
managerial.
Nick Foles. Now, of course, I'm happy and sad because I was in 3 fantasy football championships in 3 of my leagues. I've never done that. Been in 3 in 1 year, and I won 2 out of 3. So
It's a confidence booster, isn't it?
it wasn't bad. Yeah, I think, so for those 17 weeks of work, I took home, about $1,800. Wasn't too bad.
But you're not in it for the money.
No, it's the fun and the competition, of course. But
And congratulations to our friend Peter Huff from Quest, who's been a friend of the show, who's going to be leaving Quest come, I believe, yesterday or today, and will be starting a new position. So we thank him and wish him well and appreciate all the support he gave us in 2017. We welcome new friends, guests, and sponsors in 2018, and we're open to connecting and expanding.
Yes, and if you're watching us on facebook.com/RichardListens out there, don't forget to leave a question or comment, and we will try to get to it on air. I'm sure there will be a lot of great questions for Mr. Paul Shirley. Our good friend AJ Collier's checked in, and actually, this is breaking news for me. I didn't even know this. The Bears have given me a new coach for my birthday, Matt Nagy, offensive coordinator, Kansas City Chiefs. They didn't waste any time. Wow, that's pretty exciting. I had no idea.
We could use a new head coach in New York as well. So
yes,
they're giving out.
So that being said, we are going to be getting to Mr. Paul Shirley in just a moment because it's very exciting. We can't wait to hear all about his new book. And he's been on a book signing tour for it. And he's got not only stories in the book, but stories about the book and the book signing and everything. So before we get to that, Richard's going for it. Richard's going for it. Ladies, keep your temperatures down. Richard has just stripped off his sweater and is now sporting the Iowa State T-shirt and hat in homage to Paul Shirley's.
That's right. When
alma
you have an
mater.
Iowa State great in the studio, you have to, in honor of his first book, Can I Keep My Jersey? We have to, at least represent a few of the teams he was on.
Yes.
We were hoping he'd bring maybe some hats from Russia, but we'll see what we can do.
Right. Maybe there'll be some spleen x-rays or something. All right. We're giving you all this anticipation for Paul, but first, everyone always loves Caitlin and her fitness wellness tip. Welcome to the show, Caitlin.
Hi, guys. Good to see you.
How's everything on the East Coast?
Freezing, but today we've got a high about 28 degrees, so it is substantially better considering, the past weekend it was maybe -2 to -10, and at one point we had -22 with the wind chill when I was by the ocean, so
ouch.
feeling like summer at a high 28 over here.
Wow. That kind of dampers your Instagram photos outdoors, huh?
Yeah, it does. Well, I've been posting a lot more of the tropical photos, just wishing I was back there.
But there have been some beautiful snow
last time I
photos.
was in the studio that I was cold. That was nothing. That was nothing.
Yes. And of course, today in LA, it's big news because it's pouring rain out.
Is it?
Which for Los Angeles is big news. I was thinking in like all other places, like, east of the Mississippi, they could be doing shows like this in like, sub-zero temperature, and it's not even a topic because that's just life. But here in LA, it's like it's raining. We could talk for an hour about the rain and the traffic, but we won't.
Yeah.
So what do you got for us,
talking about
Caitlin?
these cold and rainy temperatures, and I know that we were just speaking with one of our guests on the show about traveling and how to stay well, and I am certainly one that is always on the go, and I'm always trying to find new ways on how to stay healthy with a busy schedule, and especially this time of year when you're not on an airplane and you're flying, and there's so many other things that your body is fighting against that you have to kind of be control of. And I know one of my tips last year was taking a zinc supplement before you're going to go through a lot of stress, whether that be traveling or the weather conditions, and just thinking about that. When you're traveling, you kind of always have to think ahead and plan ahead. And with anything with your health and wellness, I believe that's the most important is planning, but we're not all great planners. And I was looking back at like notes that I made throughout the year of being on the show. And what I thought would be great to touch on, because it's the first show of 2018, is that to kind of we all want to set the right intention and have clarity for what we want for this new year of being 2018, right? So my tip for this week is to just have clarity in all parts of your life and be specific when you're thinking about your future goals for this year, because I know a lot of times people focus on New Year's resolutions. That might be to lose some weight or to eat better or, do those things. But sometimes we can be unrealistic with ourselves. So I think it's important that when you're setting, a new priority or something that you want to improve on, that you be realistic and know that you're in control, but be clear and write it down. For me, that helps. I keep tons of different journals and books to write it down on what my goals are. And I think that will help you stay more focused with the new year. And then when it comes back to traveling, same thing. You could create one simple list that might help you. You could see how it works. And then as you continue to travel, if you're like me, then you can consistently improve on that list and find ways that you're not battling, a cold when you're on the go. Because over the past 5 years of my travels, I'd say my chances of getting sick or the times I've gotten not well while traveling have decreased, which is great. So I'm improving on what I need to do for my body to stay well when I'm on the go.
Amazing. And Caitlin, we were speaking before you came on air that I was grateful to Dr. Richard for my Chicago Bears t-shirt for my birthday. I would also like to mention and say thank you again, Caitlin. Caitlin gave me a Chicago Cubs travel coffee mug, which was made solid metal, amazing, keeps my coffee hot for so long. And she kind of hit my triumvirate of things I love. So I got a Chicago Cubs coffee travel mug, beautiful. I got donut socks and a Buddha cat bobblehead for my van.
Wow, she gave you donuts the healthiest way possible.
Yes.
Printed on your socks.
So I thank you for that great birthday gift, Caitlin, and it's definitely helping propel me in this new year. So thank you, and thanks
You're
for your
welcome.
incredible tip.
I can't wait to get back to LA. I'll be back in 2 or 3 weeks with you guys. So looking forward to it.
Looking forward to
Yes.
it. Stay warm. If you need an extra exercise, some, shoveling and squats. No, just kidding.
I was
Just
doing
kidding.
some ice chipping today.
Oh,
so that
wow.
could work out.
See, I love that. You could still go out there and do some ice chipping.
Yes.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing all those beautiful photos of the snow. I do miss it, although I'm sure I'd be complaining if I was walking around.
It's not the pretty, fluffy, nice snow. I mean, when it was coming down, it looked that way. But when it's like 2.5, 3 feet of solid ice snow, it's a different story.
All right. Thank you so enough
have a great
about
rest
the
of your
snow and rain. But Caitlin, amazing to see you as always. We thank you so much and can't wait to see you in person in a few weeks.
Yes. See you
Happy
guys.
2018. Bye.
Bye. All right. Always great to have the fitness wellness tip from Caitlin. We are very grateful to have her on the show. Don't forget, if you're watching us on Facebook.com, Richard Listens, leave a comment, check in. We'll try and get to it. I see that, my old friend, Kelly Christopher Hellerman is watching. She was actually an occupational therapist when I was doing rehab, when I was a freshly injured young quadriplegic. So she was a very inspirational figure in my life. And we have Joaquin Rivera's watching, that we both know, saying a lot of positive things for us, that he could feel the passion. Of course, we got AJ watching, Katrin Kohanim. Sorry, Katrin, I always get your last name wrong. Katrine Kohanim.
Yes.
Yes, the wife of Mac. Thanks for watching, Katrin. I always call her Katrin, but I guess it's Katrine. But anyway, enough of that. So,
I think she'll take either.
in the studio, we are so fortunate. He was first on our show on October 16th of 2016. So it's been 1 year and 4 months or change. He was on the show back then talking about his humor memoir called, Hey, Can I Keep My Jersey? I'm sure that's the voice he used when he wrote it.
If he had a New Jersey accent.
But, he's also written for Slate, Esquire, The Wall Street Journal. I mean, those are some little publications maybe you've heard of. I don't know. But I wanted to highlight the authorship of him first because a lot of us do know him as a former NBA player for the Phoenix Suns, the Chicago Bulls, the Los Angeles Lakers. He went to Iowa State, thus the Iowa State year by Dr. Richard, the Los Angeles Lakers cap by me. Finally, let's get to the guest, Paul Shirley. Welcome to Richard Listens on Sports.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Richard, for going full uniform and helmet. And you got the new colors, I think. Iowa State switched from a standard red to a more USC red recently, and I think you've got the new. I think you've got the new gear.
Yeah.
I don't even have that stuff.
Wow, you're right. That's a very USC color.
Yeah, I don't know
Well,
why.
we'll have to get you
why would
some.
Why would you do that? By the way, if you're Iowa State, you're like, you know what? We've got our own thing going. Let's go copy somebody else's look. Not a great move.
We got to get your T-shirt size. I was like, what size do we get, Paul Shirley?
I've got enough. Got enough Iowa State gear.
I'll bet.
to
Well, I
last
wear
me.
tall, so what do they make for you? Like
Mega tall,
mega tall.
large mega tall.
That is the whole thing. It's like, I mean, do you basically have to shop at big and tall men's
I
clothing?
shop on the internet because big and tall stores are built for people who are big and tall. They're rarely built for people who are just tall.
So you'd be wearing
money-
some bulky.
The money is with fat people, not with tall people.
Yeah. I mean, you look at America, and speaking of that, like, it's weird. Like, I was born and raised in Chicagoland, and whenever I go back there, like, you go to the restaurants, and, like, the portions are so huge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's all across America, really. Like, I know, like, a good friend of mine's from Germany, and when I go to a restaurant with him, it's like, he's like, this is like 3 times the portions we get. Like, we're satisfied with the small portions, but...
Right. I saw a stat just yesterday that U.S. is the fattest country in the OECD, so like 38 richest countries, basically.
Wow.
Good job, us.
Yes, go U.S. But hey, we can go on about how great the United States is right now for forever. But we will not because,
Peter, you said it was your birthday, right?
yeah,
Mine, I actually just turned 40,
no way. When
Yeah.
was your birthday?
December 23rd.
Mine was December 22nd.
I'll be damned.
Wow.
Wow.
Next year
We're
we should
each-
do a joint
We're
celebration.
each entering
Yeah.
new decades.
That
whether
is
we
funny
like it or
too.
not.
One day apart and entering the new decade.
Mhm.
That is wild.
Any advice for 40?
Wow, I mean, it feels like my 40s went by so fast, you know? Although now that I think back to, I did have a party on my 40th birthday that seems like it was forever ago, but then on the flip side, it feels like that my 40s went by in a flash. But I would definitely say, like, if I'm really taking the question seriously, that it's like really, like, you got to slow down the clock a little bit. And as much as it's easy to say, like, oh, don't take life for granted, don't take life for granted. Like, just milk everything you can out of every minute, every hour, every day, every week.
It is
every
true
month.
that when you hit 40, you're in that age where, like, that's probably heartburn, but it could be a heart attack. Like, now, you're not 25 anymore. Like, you might just drop dead at some point.
Yeah, I mean, and it is true. Like, once you get your 40s, your body does start acting differently. Like in my 20s and 30s, all-nighters, every week, every month, like, no problem. Now it's like when I have to do an all-nighter, like, the next day I'm dead. I'm a zombie.
Yeah. Okay.
It's crazy.
We've established that. I'm
So
good.
no
I
all-nighters.
agree. No all-nighters.
Try to avoid the
That's
all-nighters.
the summary.
Yes.
Well, I would say, Mr. Paul Shirley,
Mm-hmm.
continue following your passion. I mean, clearly, all the work with Writer's Block. I mean, the ability to help people express themselves and come together through writing. So, maybe you didn't have this passion, or maybe it was just bubbling up when you were entering your 30s. I'm not sure exactly when you can tell us when it really fully took off for you and went from being a hobby into, deciding you wanted to become an author. So to continue that and to continue following it in all the ways that it guides you.
All right.
Yeah.
Good stuff from the doctor. The doctor's in the house. 5 cents. You got a nickel from Paul? That was some good advice.
Well, it's inspiring, and I regularly refer my clients to go to Writer's Block. And when people talk to me, I mean, it's not the only gig in town, but it's an amazing opportunity. And the fact that Paul is using, his gift to put himself out there, and I think it's $7 a class or something like that. I mean,
$10 now.
Oh man!
Ooh.
Wow! So you have really started to.
Right. Although a monthly, what Richard's referring to is I run this. We're now a nonprofit.
Oh, okay.
This
Congratulations.
writing community / organization that meets 3 nights a week to give people a place to get writing done. Mostly because writing's very lonely, and I think it helps to be around other people who are doing that. Not only for the process of the writing itself, but also just to commiserate afterward and
Yeah, totally.
Understand that there are other people like you in the world.
And can you also kind of establish accountability buddies and stuff there?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. We talk about productivity, accountability, structure, all of those things. Because writing is such a loosey-goosey, ephemeral pastime or activity. It's nice to have some people who are expecting you to show up. So then you feel obligated to get something done, as opposed to if you're just sitting in your house thinking, I should be writing, but I'm not actually going to.
Right. I mean, I don't think I'm a writer myself. I mean, I've written screenplays and such, but I don't think I've ever met a writer that hasn't said, well, give me a deadline and I could write. You know?
Right, yeah.
But without that.
We talk about that a lot. I have, in the last 5 years or so, really made the connection between my basketball career and my writing career, in that people tend to assume, I think, with basketball players especially, but also probably with football and baseball players, that they had some natural gift and that's why they got good at it. However, if I talk to you about a figure skater or a gymnast, you'd be like, oh yeah, they practice for 6 hours a day and that's how they got good. It turns out that basketball is a lot like that. It's just that we tend to think of basketball players as naturally athletic or gifted. So I've been kind of hammering this idea that, like, I got good at basketball because I put in a lot of time, as did everyone who got good at it. And writing's the exact same way. You create this routine, this discipline, and you do it over and over and over again. And that's how you become, quote unquote, talented. There is no just like, I'm a good writer or I'm a good basketball player. It's always a product of a bunch of work.
And when I think back about, some texts which we all have to read in high school, and some which got me excited about reading probably in early college years, from Hemingway to Kerouac and On the Road and that kind of stuff. It was always about this, like, they weren't like sitting at a desk. They were connecting with their friends and going on journeys. So the idea, especially from the kind of things that people that come to me and are struggling with connection for whatever reason, the fact that they can go and explore their creativity and also connect to someone else and learn how to get feedback.
I do think people tend to view writing as a solitary activity, which on its face it might be, but like you're saying, most writers have led rich, full lives where they have spent a lot of time around other people, in part because that opens up their eyes to new perspectives and all that, but also because it reminds you of how people behave. If you're writing a screenplay or a fiction, whatever you're writing, you need to know how people behave so as to accurately capture that. And I think sometimes people get so cloistered away from the world that they forget, oh yeah, I need to be around some people who are talking so I can write about people who are talking.
Totally. And you know what I love about your observation and advice is really it's applicable to any field, if you want to act or maybe not even creative. Like I want to go on Forged on Steel on the History Network and become a guy that makes knives and swords. Mm-hmm. You're not born with like, oh my God, I can make knives. You work at that. You work at it, you work at it, you work at it, you learn.
I think what's tricky is that when you get to certain levels, so in basketball, for example, you probably don't want to let on how hard you're working, because that in your mind takes away from the majesty of it a little bit. So I think in sports especially, because we look at our athletes as cool a lot of the time, we want to think of them as like, he just, it's almost as if he's a wizard. He just walks out there and does this thing. We don't really want to think about how much work went into that, because in some ways that takes away from it. It also, and this is the dark side of it, I think people don't want to be faced with, if I actually had worked at this, maybe I would have been good at it too. They want to believe that it is some sort of like God-given talent as opposed to working really hard.
You're right. It does let people off the hook, kind of.
Yeah.
That, you didn't go out and pursue your dream fully.
I mean, as you can imagine, I've heard so many times in my life, like people will say it directly to me. Man, if I had your height, I would have done X, Y, or Z. And usually I'll just back them away.
What kind of reaction does that evoke from you, Paul?
Usually I'm like, no, actually you wouldn't.
Right. Let me tell you a story about a spleen.
Right.
But were there moments early, like clearly, like, were people pushing you towards basketball or volleyball or based on?
No. I played baseball as a kid, And basketball happened because of a rebellion against my father, actually. So he would take my brothers and I and sort of train us in the backyard to play baseball. And I found basketball as a way to kind of get away from that. It was something I could do by myself. And when I started playing at age 12 or 13, you would never have pegged me as a future NBA basketball player. In fact, my first driver's license in Kansas, you could get a learner's permit at 14. So I was going into my freshman year of high school. My driver's license, I was 5'11" and weighed 120 pounds. I was the point guard on our basketball team. And so, in fact, fell in love with basketball as a point guard, as someone who actually could use my lack of size against people, right? Like I could be clever on the court and like kind of wind my way around people. So it was only later that I grew and then was able to take advantage of that size as I got to be a 18, 19, 20-year-old.
When was your big growth spurt?
I never really had one, actually. I was one of those lucky few who just kind of like kept growing. Never had that like 7-inch summer or anything, which was probably fortuitous in that I was able to maintain a lot of those point guard-like skills. Like I could still shoot and handle the ball and those sorts of things even as I was growing.
Right. And with those kind of skills, you probably could have made it to the NBA. Oh, wait a second. That's right. The skills, the hard work,
well, yeah, I
practice.
think that's what people don't really. So, if you see me in the wild, I'm 6'9" and I weigh 230 pounds. You might think you would retroactively fit it. You'd be like, well, yeah, like that guy maybe played in the NBA. But in truth, there are lots and lots of guys who are 6'9" out in the world, right? And what people also forget is that when you get to those levels, it gets really, really competitive. Everyone knows at that level like what's at stake and what's on the line here. It's not like, oh well, we're 6'9", we should just play in the NBA. That's not quite how it goes.
Well, not only that, but look, you played at Iowa State. Everyone that plays at that level of college basketball has dreams of making it to the pros. And what are the odds? Like 5% or something?
Yeah, they're not great. The odds go up if you are 6'9" and weigh 230 pounds and you play at a national, not necessarily power, but we were really good when I was in college. So that definitely increased my chances. I benefited from playing with guys who were going to be in the NBA and from playing in a league that had lots of players who were going to be in the NBA. So
did that influence your choices?
Yeah, that's what, like when I left high school, I had this, I think it's interesting how wise we are at young ages. I think we don't give kids very much credit for how much foresight they probably have, but I could tell, like, I understand this a lot better than most people. And I think when I grow into my body and when I start to put things together that I will have a chance to be a pro, right? Now, I didn't tell anybody that because I grew up in a town of 700 people in Kansas, and you don't say those things if you grow up in a town of 700 people in Kansas. And so that influenced, yes, as you're saying, that's part of why I picked Iowa State. I thought that was the best chance I had of making it to the pros, even though I walked on at Iowa State. I was there on an academic scholarship. So went there like not knowing how it would go. Most of my other offers had been like Ivy League schools and Division II schools. So it was a real leap of faith, but it was one of those things where I just had this sense, and again, I could have been wrong, right? It worked out, but I had this sense that if I go to this big school, I can figure this out such that it will work out.
But that's tremendous intuitive power for an 18-year-old to be like, I'm giving up the scholarship to go where I have a feeling I could take a bigger leap here. And this could happen.
I vividly remember my uncle, who's one of the people I most admire in the world, is our family's Harvard grad. He went to Harvard, got an English degree, went on to be a doctor. And so I was accepted at Harvard and could have played basketball there. And he, mild-mannered man that he is, just lit me up over the phone one night because he's like, you're going to turn this down to go to Iowa State, of all places. And I don't even know if I could articulate it at the time, but I was sort of going with my gut that, like, I want to push this basketball thing as hard as I can. And if I fail at it, at least I will know I gave it a shot at the best that I could try.
Absolutely. Wow. And, it actually kind of ties in. I want to get your perspective on this. Richard and I were having a conversation before the show about putting 100% into something. Mm-hmm. And, in reflecting on things in my life, like, we talk about growing older and And, in my 20s and 30s, I spread myself thin a lot and perhaps didn't put 100, I put 80% into 10 things instead of 100% into one thing. How important was that for you to put that 100% into basketball and Iowa State? I'm giving up Harvard. If you didn't, you probably wouldn't be where you are. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think some of it from my emotional or mental makeup is a little bit of an insecurity, really, where I have this great fear of regret. So I would not want to look back at the end of my life and say, God, if I had just put the energy into that, then I could have done this. Whereas I think some people look at it, and I think that is viewed as positive by our society, so I lucked out. The opposite of that is, like, I don't want to have failed. I don't want to have tried really hard at anything because I can always keep in the back of my mind, well, if I had just tried, then I might have succeeded. I had my first coach at Iowa State was Tim Floyd, and I remember one day at practice he just went after a guy named Kelvin Cato, who went on to play in the NBA for a long time, but who was kind of limited offensively and was mostly just like a shot blocker and dunker. And he was saying to Cato, like, your problem is you don't want to be seen to be trying hard. So Kelvin Cato was one of those guys who it just kind of came naturally. He didn't want to work at it very hard because in his brain it was the opposite. He wanted to be able to say, if I had tried, I could have done X, right? You've seen that, I'm sure, in psychology. There's that two sides to that. Some people don't want to go all the way because they want to keep in reserve this idea of what could have been if I had tried. I happen to have the opposite problem.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a fear of failure, whereas for you, the fear of regret is that long view, whereas I'd rather swing big and take this
which
risk.
I think has led to a lot of sadness and misery, but in a positive way, right? Where you're like, I can remember with the Lakers, you're wearing the Lakers hat. When I went to training camp with the Lakers.
We can take them off if they're too traumatic. You're looking at our clothing like, I hate these guys.
When I went to training camp with the Lakers, I was completely unheralded, not drafted, last invite to camp, had really no business being there. It was the Lakers of Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant and Phil Jackson. And threw it all out there as best I could, but was the first guy cut. It was me and Dennis Scott, who was at the very end of his career. I took some solace in the fact that 3D and I were called in at the same time. But I remember that feeling of just abject failure when I went back to the hotel after getting cut by the Lakers, even though it wasn't a surprise. Like it wasn't like I was killing everybody in practice. It would have been a real leap of faith for them to keep me around. But there is that sense of like, I did everything I could and I wasn't even close, which leads to some pretty extreme sadness, right? But I think that is cathartic in its way, right? Like you've hit that bottom because there's nothing else I could have done.
So did it push you back into basketball or did it push you?
Yeah, I think it was a great trainer for how life works in that you fail over and over again. And eventually there's some little green shoots where you start to see like, oh, well, it worked because I tried really hard in this whatever circumstance. And if I just keep doing that over and over and over again, it will probably go okay.
So it speaks to the importance of failing repeatedly to become successful.
I mean, it's funny we're talking about this because
perceive failure. Because some people like just to get a tryout with the Lakers would be a dream. Right.
Yeah. So I think it depends on your context, right? So for me, I could perceive that as failure because I felt like I can do this. I'm not there yet, but I'm not quite there. So I do a fair bit of public speaking and had an agent for a while. And when I first started doing these talks, I would talk about failure as a great teacher, right? And loved that because I love that subject. I think it's so important to be able to talk about how to fail, how to pick yourself up after it, how to like move through this, which is a thing I've just done over and over in my life. But that agent said, like, well, look, we can't pitch a speech with the word failure in it, which was frustrating because I was like, I think that's important. So in the end, I have fired that guy, and now I'm starting to get back to, I do want to talk. I love talking about failing and how it's a great teacher and how recovering from that, learning how to recover from it is really the best skill you can have in any of these sort of pursuits, whether that's writing or entrepreneurship or sports.
Yeah, and and so now you've segue. We want to talk about your book, but there's a couple of interesting segues here. Like, first of all, your book is about dating, and you're a writer. So the first kind of segue, and then I also want to talk about your book tour and going back to your hometown. But as a writer now, are you all in 100%?
Yeah, I think that took a failure as well. My career ended when I was 32 or 33, and my first book had come out when I was, 29 or something like that, in the middle of my career. I had continued to write and had plans to write after my career. I didn't quite know how that would work, so I spent like 3 years on a novel that was very much based on my own life, and would work on it, hard sometimes, not so hard other times. Ended up sending that to my then literary agent. He took it out to some publishers. They all said no. He said, I don't know what more we can do with this. I said, well, I'll self-publish this. So I sent it off to an editor, and she wrote back, and I remember vividly, I had moved to LA. I was in a coffee shop on Venice Boulevard when I got her note, which said, Paul, unfortunately, this is neither a memoir nor a novel. It doesn't have a place. It's not quite good enough. And it hit me in the way that these things do. When you kind of know deep down, like, this thing isn't quite right, like whatever I'm working on, it just isn't quite good enough. So I was in tears in this coffee shop, and that was one of those moments where I had failed, and part of the reason I had failed was because I wasn't working hard enough at it. So that was my little come to Jesus meeting with myself, or my dark side, like they talk about in screenwriting, right? Like the dark night of the soul. So that was when it hit me, like, you know what? The problem here is I haven't committed. I haven't gone all in on setting up my life so that I can put out books. And since then, I've gotten really rigid about, I write for 1 hour a day. You've probably seen me at Aharon's coffee shop.
That's right. You switch
writing.
Coffee shops. This was part of your...
I move around from coffee shop to coffee shop. And I try to, and sometimes this gets screwed up by like book tours or something, but I write for 1 hour, 6 days a week before I turn on my phone. And it is amazing the output that I've managed in whatever it's been, 3 or 4 years since then. I've gotten this book that we are talking about is out in the world. The 4th draft of another book is in the works now. The 3rd draft of yet another book is already done.
Wow.
So like it just works to continue to like, now with that said, I don't know that any of these are going to work out, right? Like, who knows if these books are going to be any good? But I can tell you that I've thrown it all at the wall. There's not a lot left in the tank as far as like.
So you're kind of
commitment.
trusting your process and what allows your mind to not be distracted,
right,
by media and other things. And do you
exactly.
do you just sit down and just see which one of those projects is kind of?
No, it's very
Or it's
like
structured.
again, also very structured in that I will work on a book or a draft for 3 months at a time. So I, moved stories I tell on dates out the door, and then the next move was now I need to go back and finish the 3rd draft of this young adult novel that I'm working on. But I'm only going to allow myself 3 months because I've found that that's about my personal attention span before I start to kind of work in reverse and screw things up. And then I'm able to let something else simmer in the back of my head while this next project that I'm working on is at the forefront.
So it is giving yourself some self-imposed deadlines.
Oh, totally. Yeah, it's all about that routine and the rigidity and the deadline of knowing, like, I love what I love about it, and it goes back to what I found about basketball, which was if you can say, I'm going to go to the court every day for an hour, when you'll appreciate this about the psychology of it, you are making a deal with your brain that you're only going to work out with an hour. I think a lot of times people screw up because some days they'll work out for 2 hours, some days it's a half an hour, and then your brain never quite knows when you're about to be done. So you don't know how to just throw it all out there. It's the same with writing. I will cut myself off at an hour no matter where I am because I've made that deal with myself. When I start, look, Paul, you only have to do it for an hour. And then that makes it easier to start. But I have to keep that deal with myself in the same way that in my basketball days, I would say, whatever it was, okay, you're going to go to the track and you're going to run 8 400s. Well, you're not going to run 9. You're going to run 8. It's going to be hard, but you only have to run 8.
So you're not concerned with the quantity of pages?
No. I mean, sometimes I will push myself instead of an hour. It might be you're going to write 1,500 words of a rough draft, which usually takes about an hour. But I've set some very hard and fast goal because I think it's important for our brains to know that there is an end point.
So can you set say you have a lot of writing to do.
Mm-hmm.
You stick your hour in the morning, but then can you write for 5 hours that afternoon if you need to write a lot more?
No, not on the books.
Wow, that's really
because
fascinating.
that's you're breaking the deal with your brain.
Wow, okay.
It's like I think that's again, I have a long experience with this because I've been doing it since I was 16 with something.
Yeah.
It was basketball for a long time, but I would go to basketball camp sometimes and you'd see some college player who would get up there and he'd be like, well, kids, you know what? I shoot 1,000 shots every day. And you're like, that's bullshit. You don't do that. If you did that, your arm would fall off.
Yeah.
A. And B, you would be the best shooter in the world. And you are not. You are a ninth guy at the University of Missouri. So I know that you're not doing that. I think it's actually one of the things that keeps people from doing things is that it seems so intimidating because writers will talk about, well, yeah, I write for 4 hours a day. No, you don't. You're on Facebook for 3 hours and 15 minutes and you actually wrote for 45 minutes. And now you're creating a barrier to entry because you sort of want to believe yourself that you're working harder than you actually are.
Right, and deep down inside, you kind of know you're lying to yourself.
Right, yeah.
Wow, it's a really strong and interesting theory that's sticking to that hour.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe some people will give themselves 2 hours, whatever, but
yeah, maybe it's 2 hours, but
sticking to
in a
that
lot of
agreement.
cases, I think it'd be better to say it's 30 minutes, especially if you're just getting started.
Yeah.
Well, I love this principle of like short-term goals, the frequency of 5-6 days a week. That in a way it takes the pressure off.
Oh yeah, I think it really frees up the creative side too because you're able to take chances that you might not otherwise because look, I'm going to be back at it tomorrow, and if I screw something up, I'll fix it tomorrow, right? Whereas I think a lot of people get stuck because they're writing once a week or they're working out once a week or whatever the thing is. And then that takes on so much importance to you because you're like, well, this is my only chance this week. I'm going to be now paralyzed by the fear that I'm going to mess this up, right? And how am I going to remember where I was or whatever it is? I think in a lot of ways, what I'm talking about is laziness, actually.
Yeah.
It's like you're creating efficiency in the routine such that you don't have to go through all of this other stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, this is really so brilliant in so many ways because so much of my work with clients, whether they be athletes or not, is about slowing down their process. What's going on in their brain when they get to the free throw line?
Mm-hmm.
Right, like we said, it is taking multiple free throws and practicing the same form over and over.
Right.
But if you're out there too long, if you're already fatigued,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be the same if you make a deal.
Well, yeah, if you think about like the way you warm up to work out, whether that's running or yoga or whatever it is, you probably set up a pretty standard routine, right? And I think we forget that we need that in other pursuits in our lives. I think we naturally do it if we go into an office, right? We'll be like, well, I go in and I get my coffee and I say hello to Peter and then I check Twitter or whatever it is. So we create these routines without knowing them. Sometimes those routines can be destructive because they might take us away from whatever we're trying to pursue. So if your routine with working out were, well, I go in and then I stretch and then I shoot some black tar heroin and then I go work, you'd be like, well, we need to cut out the heroin
Yeah.
and then we can figure out how to. So I think things like checking Twitter before you start writing, that's the equivalent of black tar heroin. It's going to get you out of the creative process. So how can you create this routine or this regimen that you can just do over and over in the same way that you would do for a free throw? You wouldn't go up there to a free throw and be like, well, this time I'm going to stand on my head and dribble 4 times before I shoot, and the next time it's going to be me flipping off the crowd before I shoot.
Right.
Like, that would be crazy.
So how do you find those things for the writers out there? How do you find those things that kind of settle you and help you focus in or to trigger when is that hour every day?
So for me, it's music, actually. My routine is that as I mentioned, I don't turn on my phone until after I've written. This all happens after I've had a big breakfast, I've meditated, I've done some stretching, all of that. I drive to a coffee shop. I try to, as quickly as I can, get my computer out, play a song that's going to like kind of get me going for the day. And then that's when the writing starts. I will listen to other music that's more like writer friendly for the hour that I'm writing. And then when I'm done, after an hour's done, I can listen to whatever ridiculous song I want. So something poppy and absurd to serve as like a break. Like, okay, we're done. Now we're listening to Def Leppard, right? Like whatever the reward song is.
What are some of your, those first songs, like the Get You Going songs? What are some of your favorites to play for that?
A lot of them are just like something that I'm listening to now that I'm loving, right? Like something that I'm really into. There's a song by this band Sylvan Esso that I'm really into this last 6 months or so.
Wow,
So,
I'm not familiar with them.
so that
I'll have
might
to
be a
check it
band
out.
that I would like listen to that to kind of like get me going for the day. And then now I'm writing. Now I'm going. You can do this.
And what's writing music then?
Writing music is usually something without lyrics.
It's like chill music?
Like post-rock, like Explosions in the Sky, that sort of thing.
Nice.
I find that lyrics kind of screw up the wordsmithery.
Yeah, I know when I'm writing like a screenplay, depending on the genre, like I'll kind of listen to music to match that genre. Like if it's a comedy, I'll listen to happy pop music,
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
If it's something maybe more dramatic or thriller, I'll kind of find music that matches that, and it really gets the creative flow going. But I love this regimen. But speaking of the regimen in writing, we got to talk about your book.
Yeah, man.
Stories I Tell on Dates. And also I want to say hello to Randy Franklin checking in, Terry Palermo, an old friend of mine from high school. Jewel Hargrove is listening. Joaquin Rivera says, Paul and Richard, thanks for sharing your experiences. You're helping many people. Yes.
Probably millions.
Yes.
We can only assume.
So, Stories I Tell on Dates. So, Paul, I'm checking it out on Goodreads.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you're aware of this, but maybe not. Do you realize that you've got a 4.74 out of 5-star rating on Goodreads? That's
All right.
amazing.
That seems good.
That's like 95% from the free throw line.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Paul.
I don't, as they say in internet speak, don't read the comments, right? So I try to stay off of reading anyone's reviews of my book, but yeah.
Yeah, but I mean,
cool.
that's like a pretty awesome amalgamation. That's the equivalent of being certified rotten for a movie, Rotten Tomatoes,
Right,
but that's
right.
good.
It's
a
a
good
very,
thing.
I mean, it's certified rotten for small indie flick.
Yes. And so, but this is just like your first book, Can I Keep My Jersey? This is stories of your experiences. And it sounds like you're now working on fiction, which is cool. Which you like better, the fiction or stories from your life?
I think fiction has a longer lifespan just because I've squeezed the lemon dry on stories from my own life. So it's nice to be able to write things that aren't necessarily true to my exact existence, although there's, of course, a lot of truth in fiction. But yeah, I'm sort of tired of my own life at this point. Like I've written enough about it.
But of course, by the time you turn my age, 50 in 10 years, you could probably squeeze out another
maybe I'll have another one.
another
by
book
then.
of experiences.
Stories I tell my kids.
Yes. So what made you decide to write a book about stories you tell on dates?
It came about fairly organically, in that I noticed that when I was on dates, I had these stories that I would kind of find my way to. I think we all have certain stories that define who we are. I've been on a lot of dates because I've lived in a lot of places and I've been single for a long time, and I've kind of studied this without necessarily knowing I was studying it. And at first I was a little angry with myself because it seemed like I was going into material, but I think it's pretty universal and also can be forgiven, because I think we have these stories. So if I met Peter, right, and I said, hey man, why are you in a wheelchair? You probably have a story
Right.
that that explains that pretty quickly, so that you don't have to take half an hour to do it, right?
Yeah.
And so similarly, I have certain stories that explain, like, what it was like growing up in a small town, or my NBA experience quickly, or what it was like being in Iowa State, or being in Spain, or
Or
having
your
my-
mother teaching you sex ed.
Right. And a lot of those stories, I think,
Tried to throw him off, didn't you?
a lot of those stories are ways to reframe the conversation. So if I'm in LA and I'm out on a date with some girl who maybe thinks, oh, this guy played in the NBA, he probably thinks he's pretty glamorous, I might want to undercut that by telling the story of my mom teaching me sex ed, because that humanizes me. That makes me a real person who's been through this, at the time, traumatic experience of having his mother put a condom onto her forearm in front of a home ec class.
Things that happen in a town of 700, huh?
Right. So I noticed that I did this, and I started writing down the best 50 that I could think of. Winnowed that down to 20 or so that I thought were the most germane, and then started to kind of figure out okay, which of these are the ones that are really going to connect. Obviously, the title's a little bit of a misnomer because I wouldn't tell a 20-page story on a date because that would make me a psychopath. But I liked that framework. So each chapter now starts on a date. I explain how did I meet this girl in Russia? How did we come to be on this date? And now why would I tell her a particular story? Then I go back and tell the story, and then I come back and explain what happened with the date. The third rail, as it were, that I think helps make the book work is that it also serves as a sort of quest for love. I figured out at about age 27 that I'd not really had an adult girlfriend. So the chapters are in chronological order of me going on dates where I'm kind of increasingly looking for a special someone. And it ends on something of a happy note.
Right, and I must admit, I haven't read the book yet. I purchased it on Kindle. I haven't read it yet. But what is, well, I guess I don't know what the special note at the end of the book is, because I was going to ask, what does it do to your, well, and don't tell us, because people need to buy the book and read the ending.
Go buy the book.
What is this special note that Stories I Tell on Dates ends with? But whatever that high note is, what does a book like this do to your dating life? Now, obviously, the women are like, oh, come on, Paul, really? Chapter 16? You're breaking that story out? Come on, man, really?
You're already giving me that one? That's supposed to be a fourth date story. I haven't run into that yet because the book's not been out for very long, and we'll see. I'll report back in a year.
And you do have 30 stories that didn't make the book.
Yeah, I got a lot to talk about.
Still mine the well from. Mm-hmm. So it's crazy. We're finally getting into the depths of the book, and we have about 4 minutes left of the show. But what I do want to get to really quick is you've been on a book tour, a signing tour, and you went back to your hometown, which is a very small town, and you're sitting across from a psychologist. So I wanted to kind of get into that conversation.
4-minute therapy session. Go.
Yeah.
Which part?
So how was it?
The going home or going to Iowa State?
No, going home.
I think it was tough for my parents because I guess it had not occurred to me because I've been writing so much or so, not necessarily frequently, but there's such a copious amount of material about my life in the world. And I've spent a lot of my life growing up in front of other people, mostly on basketball courts, but also in writing. It was surprising to me that my parents were, I guess, taken aback by how open I was. I was like, well, yeah, I'm gonna tell these things because they're true and they humanize me and they allow other people to relate to me, which is the greatest purpose I think you can go for in writing is I'm going to allow someone else to connect to an experience I've had. But I think my parents, who maybe definitely grew up in a different time, but also just have a different outlook on how you should talk about your life, didn't necessarily love that.
Yeah. How did your mom feel about, so you're telling people I put a condom on my forearm in front of you?
Well, it's funny because my mom actually does some public speaking, and she will say that she has her own story of that day, right? She has her own perspective, which I've not actually ever heard, but it's interesting to think about how, right, I had this experience with my mom teaching sex ed, but she had an experience where she's teaching her son's class sex ed, and she knows everyone in the room because it's a town of 700 people. So she has her own perspective on that story. So maybe she'll write a book someday.
Not only, I wonder how many shattered expectations. I mean, using her forearm for the condom. I mean, that's
that's
like
a lot.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm aiming
When
for?
when I would tell that story, when I was like, I don't know, 20, I was telling that story around my mom, and when I would tell it, I remembered it as a banana. And my mom stopped me one time, and she's like, "Paul, no, that's not what happened." And I thought, "Oh, I've made this worse in my head, like you do. Like, you tend to make things more traumatic."
You were so traumatized.
Yeah, and she's like, "No, I used my whole forearm." I was like, "Oh, that's way worse." I actually made it better in my brain for the first time ever.
Right. Okay. So we've only got a minute left. Paul Shirley, amazing. Thank you for joining us again. The book, you can get it anywhere, right? I mean, I got it Amazon Kindle. You get it from Amazon.
Yeah, or there's an audiobook, which I recommend if you
Right,
if you
which
like the
you
sound of
narrate.
I told the stories, and I think it's kind of fun to hear me tell those stories.
Right. Now that's a whole nother thing too, that just the experience of narrating your own book for the audiobook.
Don't want to do that again.
Is that on Kindle, Audible? What
It's
do you
on
recommend?
Audible, yeah.
Yeah.
Audible or iTunes.
I think I might have to check that out now as well.
Yeah, thanks, man.
So look for his book, Stories I Tell on Dates, Paul Shirley. And we'll have to have you back in a year from now to kind of hear
Yeah,
about
we'll
how
just
the
make it a yearly check-in.
how the ending might have gotten turned into something.
We'll get Richard in some Iowa State pants.
And so Paul, thank you for being on the show, and thank you all for tuning in here at UBN Radio TV or Facebook.com RichardListens. I do want to say, we have a show every other Monday, and on Monday the 15th, we have in studio coming here, Farron Benjamin. She is a sports agent at First Pick Sports Agency, and she also does some media for the Dodgers and other places. It's going to be really interesting.
If you see hashtags on the dashboards of USC or UCLA games, or maybe even the Rams or Chargers, it's Farron.
Yeah, and
former collegiate athlete.
And she represents players in the NFL right now. In fact, she has a gentleman, Antoine Woods Sr., who's a nose tackle on Tennessee Titans, and they're in a good place right now.
Wow, aren't they?
And then on February 5th, we are going to have Brian Reisenauer, who's an Olympic weightlifter, and he's currently on the world weightlifting team. And he's got a pretty inspirational story about being, maybe not the biggest guy in the room who's lifting unreal weights. So a couple of really fun and interesting shows and guests ahead. But thank you again for tuning in. Thank you again, Mr. Paul Richard, for being our guest.
Paul
And-
Shirley.
Oh my God.
Paul Richard.
Paul Richard.
Paul Richard is
I kind of did a
somebody-
combo there. I'm like not even listening to
That's
myself.
a porn star's name.
And so thank you to Paul Richard, the porn star, for listening. Paul Shirley, Dr. Richard Olberg, of course, Jarvis Essex, our amazing engineer.
And
Thank
Peter's
you.
feng shui expert for getting him to wear purple.
Yes. And thanks again for tuning in to Richard Listens on Sports, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.